Hey, friend, you want to cover me here? You're like, I don't have my wallet. Like, you go unprepared. It feels weird. Some of you went to your serve day projects yesterday, and you knew you were working outside, but you did not bring sunscreen, and now you're paying for it. In fact, I met somebody who had that last service, red nose, just like peeling going on there. Like, you've been places where you were unprepared. And over the past few weeks, we've been in this series called Transforming a Nation, where we've been talking about making changes, transforming a nation. We're talking about this letter in the New Testament called Titus, where Paul is writing to a guy named Titus who's shepherding a church. He's leading a church on an island called Crete. And they're trying to, and the gospel message that Ben talked about in week 1 is what's going to transform this area. And a lot of us can see a lot of the issues in our world, whether it's our job, our home, our community, our workplace, our church, whatever it might be. And we want to change those things, but we don't always feel like we have the right tools. We sometimes feel like we've stepped into something and then we realize that we're totally unprepared. And so we're looking at what it takes today. We're going to look at what it looks like to be prepared to transform the areas that we find ourselves in. And we kicked this off week 1. Ben Snyder, who I know I make fun and poke, but I have a ton of respect for Ben. Ben kicked it off week 1, and he did an incredible job explaining that the gospel, the good news, this message, this news, not advice, but news, that Jesus died for our sins and resurrected to give us new life, can absolutely and radically change the world. And he said that it's not us and what we do that is most important, but it's actually our belief and our trust in that truth and that principle and that gospel and that good news. And his bottom line was that our beliefs shape behavior. Like, it's what we believe about God and about Jesus that actually shapes how we behave. And transforming a nation begins with living a gospel-shaped life. And then last week, he continued the series by talking about how if we're going to see that gospel radically transform our communities and transform our world, then we need leaders to step up. And what his bottom line was last week is that your influence has more potential than you realize. And so this week, we're going to look at what that actually looks like. We're going to look at some practical stuff in chapter 2 of Titus, where Paul gives Titus and 5 groups of people some very practical things, very practical ways in which they should live if they're living a gospel-shaped life. It's ultimately directions on how we ought to treat one another given the gospel, like in light of the gospel. So here's what a gospel-shaped life looks like. We're going to start in verse 1 of chapter 2. He says, "As for you, Titus, promote the kind of living that reflects wholesome teaching." And so, like, one of the things you'll see if you go back and read chapter 1 is that Paul he's got some criticisms and some words for a group of people that were false teachers in this church. And they would teach things that were unwholesome, and they would promote living that would go contrary to the gospel. It would go contrary to the gospel. And so what he's telling Titus here is like, hey, because one of the biggest criticisms that people have of the church is that the church is full of hypocrites. Very easy to, because everybody says that. Like, that's just, and what Paul is saying here is, hey, Titus, the same wholesome stuff that you're teaching, the gospel, the good news, you got to live that out as well. And you got to teach people to live that out as well. Because we want the people to be the real deal. And our hope, my hope as one of the pastors here, and even like all of our staff and all of our dream team, our collective hope, for those of you that are attending for the first time, or you're just kind of like, you're just attending and you're kind of waiting out the waters, our hope is that as you interact with our dream team, our volunteer team, and our staff team, that you would see that we're the real deal. Like, that we're real people that have real struggles and that we're honest about them, and that we don't parade ourselves around like, look, if you could just be more like me, then everything would be okay. Like, the more you get to know me, the more you realize, like, Andy doesn't have it figured out. But he's trying as hard as he can to be like Jesus. I want to be more and more like Jesus. I want to be honest about where I've fallen short and trust in his work instead of my own. And hopefully that's what you would see as you get closer and closer to people that you see as spiritual leaders or people that are leading in our church. And that's what Paul is really calling Titus to here, is a non-hypocritical lifestyle in a sense. But then he's going to get to our 5 groups of people, and he starts in verse 2. He says this, "Teach the older men." Now, I got to stop here, because I did not write this, so I did not choose older men. I don't know what term is correct so as not to offend. And I'm very sensitive to this because I pastor the Oregon campus. And I love the Oregon campus, but just to give you a little bit of an insight, we're a wiser community. We're a little older out there. Like, it's fun. It's a great time. I'm in a men's group. My men's group is me and like a dude my age, and then like a bunch of retired guys. They have a lot of experience. I've learned so much too. I've learned a lot about like knee pain and replacements. And how to get Social Security and how difficult it is, Medicare, like all that stuff I've learned about. My guys they're going to give me a hard time, but it's true. I hear a lot about it. But here, look at what Paul says to the older men, to tell Titus, teach these older men these things. He says to exercise self-control, or to be sober-minded is another way you could phrase that. He says to be worthy of respect or to have dignity, and then to live wisely. They must have sound faith and be filled with love and patience. This is what it looks like, older men, when you live a gospel-shaped life. And I know I was giving my dudes a hard time out at Oregon, but I see this time and time again when I sit in that circle of those men on Monday nights. I get to see these men as they navigate raising grandchildren or raising children who have children who have children. And they do it with a sound faith, knowing they believe and they trust in this beautiful message of the gospel. And I get to see it as they do it with love and patience. I look up to those older men that I spend time with on a regular basis. This is what it looks like as an older man to live a gospel-shaped life. But he's not done with just the older men. He's going to continue on to the next group of people, older women. He says, similarly, that was weird, teach the older women to live in a way that honors God. They must not slander others or be heavy drinkers. Instead, they should teach others what is good. Now, I was not alive when this letter was written. I don't know what was going on in this church, but it seems like there was a lot of older women just getting drunk, talking smack about one another. That's what it seems like was going on. That's what they were doing. They were having a good time, and just you hear about Tammy, and they're just, going, and you're like, what? What are you doing? I'm sorry, Tammy, if there's a Tammy here. Could be somebody else, I don't know. I don't know what was going on, but Paul clearly saw something, so he was like, hey, let's not do that anymore. That you have, and we're all kidding aside, I'm sure that's not exactly what was going on, but all kidding aside, as I read more and more about what Paul was getting at here, it became evident that Paul saw that a lot of these older women who were very responsible for their homes, very responsible for the children, very responsible for what happened at home, as they saw their children kind of grow up and leave the house, they found themselves without purpose. They found themselves just kind of sitting around, so they filled it with things that didn't really ultimately matter. And what I love about Paul, and what I love about the New Testament in general, specifically starting with Jesus, is how he elevates women. And he tells them, you have way more to offer than just this. In fact, look at how he ends that verse. He says, instead, they should what? Teach others what is good. He's like, women, you have a lot to offer. I want you to offer what you have to offer. Teach others what is good. Don't just sit around just wasting time. Actually use what God has given you, your experience, where you've made mistakes, where you've done well, and teach others those things. Teach them what is good. You have a lot to offer. And he continues to give them a very specific assignment when he introduces the next group of people, the younger women. He says, these older women must train the younger women to love their husbands and their children, to live wisely and to be pure, to be separated from that Cretan culture that we talked about in week 1. To work in their homes, which you might get a little tripped up by that. That's not just like you belong in the kitchen, stay there. That's not what Paul is saying. What Paul is saying instead, rather, is that it's a very important place. The home is a very important place, and all of us have priorities in the home. In fact, to prove that point, if you go back to chapter 1, one of the qualifications for leaders in the church, male and female, is to take care of things at home. And that's what he's saying here. To work in their home, to do good, and to be submissive to their husbands. Nothing controversial there, so we're just going to move on. If you've been, If you've been reading along in Titus with us, if you have not, I would encourage you to download the app, get into our app, and subscribe to the Titus reading plan. You've probably come across a couple passages where you're like, what do I do with that? So I spent a significant portion of time reading through a lot of different commentaries and studies and word studies on what this phrase, being submissive to husbands, actually means. And so I got a lot of different perspectives through this. And I'll tell you what, just getting over a sickness. There are a ton of different perspectives on what this phrase means. You can have one, I'll give you two today. One particular camp would say, and this is a popular one, would say that basically what it means is that in the family, there is a structure that God ordained. There is a husband at the head of the family who is responsible for the spiritual leadership of the family. The wife, the mom, submits to the husband's leadership spiritually and then guides the household underneath that head. That's one perspective. The other perspective is that there's a mutual submission going on. Is that both husband and wife are called to submit to one another, back and forth, and lead together spiritually in the home. And this camp would say that if you look at the actual word, to be submissive to, and the verb part of that verb would actually be used in a military context. oftentimes. And it would say things like, lend your military support to. So put yourself back in the first century church and you think you're a Christian family trying to lead and trying to follow Jesus, this brand new teaching, and you're in the middle of this place that's very hostile towards Christianity. Not just the people in the area are, but you got like spiritual stuff going on, spiritual darkness going on. And what Paul could be saying here is, Titus, tell the younger women, you have a big responsibility here. Don't just sit back and let your husband take care of it. Like, you should lend some support. You should be involved in the spiritual fight as well. You are called to this. So those are two of the different perspectives potentially about what it could mean to be submissive to husbands. No matter what, look what happens when these younger women live this way. They will not bring shame on the word of God. Like, they're building up their homes in this way. They're producing something good that could transform a nation. And then this is the younger woman. Look at how he talks to the younger men. In the same way, encourage the young men to live wisely. That's it. Now, I consider myself a younger man, at least for right now. I'm mid-30s. I'm getting there. I'll get there eventually someday, you know. And right now I'm a younger man. And so I sat there, I'm like, that's it? Like, you got all this other stuff that looks like, well, here's what it looks like to live a gospel-shaped life for older men and older women and younger women. And it's like, younger men, it's like, hey, don't do stupid stuff and you'll be fine. Like, that's how I took it. And I was getting a little frustrated, and then I was like, well, wait, that actually kind of makes sense. If you're a younger man, you know what I'm talking about. And I started thinking through, like, how does this actually apply? Well, a couple years ago, I started running. It was actually in 2019. Changed my life. Like, I love running. Big fan. Done marathons, half marathons. I did this relay race. We did a Cedar Creek corporate team in the Ragnar relay. And 2 years running, we've won first place for corporate teams. This is us. You should cheer for that, because that's your church. You know, and here's the deal. What's even cooler, just so we're on the same page, I was voted MVP of the team. Yeah, by myself. Nobody else voted for it. I thought I was nobody agreed. But then the next year they did say, like, yeah, you're the MVP, Andy. Okay. Anyway, so I love running. I'm a big fan. I've gained a lot of friends from it. But what I've discovered over the past year or so is that I was having some pretty intense pain in my hips area, like around here. And long story short, got an x-ray. And I have severe, no joke, severe arthritis in my hips on my left side and moderate on my right. And so I have a lot more in common with my dudes at Oregon than I thought. Yeah. They're like, I've had a hip replacement, Andy. It'll be okay. I'm like, you are 65. Okay? No offense. All right. Anyway, so I have an appointment with an orthopedic surgeon in a week. They're going to tell me some stuff about what I can and cannot do. But in the meantime, I couldn't wait, so I had some connections. I talked to somebody else who's an orthopedic surgeon to kind of give me the lay of the land. And they're like, yeah, you're probably going to need a hip replacement. I'm like, my gosh, what? Probably shouldn't be running anymore. And that's like, if you fall in love with something like that, like, it's kind of crushing. He's like, you shouldn't be running more. You should do low-impact exercise, stuff like that. Like, it's just going to be too much on you. He said they'll probably do injections to kind of relieve the blah, blah, blah. I don't give you all the details. In fact, I don't really understand them anyway because I haven't met with the doctor yet. But in the meantime, I get this news. I'm all kind of bummed about it. And then I get an email from Ben inviting me to the next Ragnar relay race next year. And then I'm at dinner with Josh, who's in the picture. Josh is right here, right there. I'm talking to him, and his wife is there, and our friends are there, and we're all talking, we're hanging out, and Josh was like, hey, you going to do Ragnar next year? I said, I did get the email. My wife is sitting next to me, and she's like, yeah. And I was like, and I know, like, with the arthritis stuff, like, I just staring at Josh, looking at Kayla, and she's like, yeah. And I was like, I know what I have to do. And she's like, it's sad. And I was like, I got to start training right now. Because I'm young and dumb and I'll do stupid stuff. Like, I'm not going to listen. Like, they say that when they give hip replacements to younger dudes, like, they fail very quickly, and it's not because of any other reason other than the fact that we don't listen. And we will run and we'll do stupid stuff and jump off of high things just because our friends dare us to. So when I hear Paul say, don't do stupid stuff, I'm like, all right, fine. I get it. I understand. But here's the deal. All joking aside, all kidding aside, that's not what's really going on here. Yes, to live wisely means to learn from your mistakes, not to continue to repeat the same ones. But he says this thing, he says, in the same way, and a way you could translate that would be like likewise. Be like summing this up. So ultimately, as a younger man or somebody else in one of these categories, you can't just say like, okay, this part applies to me, but nothing else does. Because it would be like me saying like, yeah, I'm a younger man, but I'm not in the older women category. So if I want to, I can get drunk and start a podcast and talk smack about people. It'd be no, I can't do that. That would not be right. I can't say, well, it doesn't apply to me because he was talking to the older women. No, All of it in the same way. Likewise, all of this is what it looks like to live a gospel-shaped life. So live wisely. That's the fourth group of people. The fifth group of people says this in verse 9, slaves must always obey their masters. So now you know what happens when Ben comes across a really difficult passage. Just gives them to Andy. He'll take it. It's fine. Wives submit to their husbands, slaves, masters. Andy's got it. It'll be fine. Sitting there poring over this. I'm like, what the heck am I going to do? It's not that controversial. This is not talking about the type of slavery that we would think of in the United States of America from the founding of our country. This is not the same type of slavery. This is not a lifelong type of slavery. In fact, there are only two types of slaves really in the Roman Empire at this time. It would have been like prisoners of war in a sense, like people that were captured, that were combatants, but also, and more popularly, and really what he's probably getting at here, are people that are called bondservants. And bondservants were people that owed a lot of debt, and so they entered into a contract with someone to work off their debt. That's what it was, basically. It was not lifelong, but sometimes the people that they worked for, the bosses or whatever, would be kind of difficult people to work for. Now, I was thinking through, what does this look like today? We don't really have a program or a situation like this today, except for the fact that how many of you work to pay off debt? You don't have to raise your hands. It's fine. It's most of you. You have a house. I know how it works. You got a car, credit cards, student loans, whatever it might be. You go to the job, you go to get a paycheck so you can pay off the debt. It's similar. It's not the same thing, but I think the wisdom, or at least Paul's going to say, here's what it looks like to live a gospel-shaped life as a bond servant. I think that same wisdom can apply to those of us today where it's here's what it looks like to live a gospel-shaped life if you are an employee. Here's what it looks like. Obey their masters or their bosses, their supervisors. Do what you're told and do your best to please them. Well, Andy, you don't know my boss. She, he, whatever, can be a real jerk sometimes. Great. That's why I deleted this verse right here after the period that says, unless they're a jerk, then you don't have to listen to me. It's actually not in there. That never appears. He doesn't give unless they're really mean, then you don't have to listen to them. No, he says, always obey and do your best to please them. You must not talk back or steal, but must show yourself to be entirely trustworthy and good. I know this. I love my job. I don't have this same struggle. I'm just being 100% honest. But I meet with so many of you that have this struggle. My wife, Kayla, who became a nurse, no joke, at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, has had this struggle where you wake up and you have to force yourself to go to work. And you hate it. I get it. I understand it. I've talked to several people through this. You have been placed, I believe this wholeheartedly, whether you love your job or not, you have been placed there at least for this season by God to transform something. If you're a follower of Jesus, you have been placed there, let's look at this again, to show yourself to be entirely trustworthy and good, to please your difficult to please boss, to show up early, to provide an incredible amount of value. Why? Why would we do this? Because then you will make the teaching, and this is so cool, you will make the teaching about God our Savior attractive in every way. Now this is profound. You can read right past this, but you'll miss something huge. What's more attractive, by the way, than the gospel of Jesus Christ? What is more attractive than the good news that has radically transformed our world? What is more attractive than the idea that the God of the universe decided to die in your place and then give you brand new life in relationship with him? It's the most attractive news ever. And yet, Paul says, if you're a good employee, if you strive to be a very good employee, that makes the message even more attractive. That's work on purpose. That is a big deal. That should change the way you walk into work. It should change the way you wake up and go, I know I got to go to work. And it's I don't want to go there, my boss. And if you walk like that into work, it's weird. But don't kick unless your job is a soccer player. I don't know. So you go to work, and instead of being disgruntled and stuff, you're yeah, I may not love every part of my job. I may have a really tenuous relationship with my supervisor, my employees, or even the people that I'm on the same level with, but I am on purpose. I'm showing up there as somebody who's been radically transformed by the gospel, or I can be a really grumpy person. And don't you think, I see this on social media and stuff, we have way too many grumpy Christians out there. If you've been transformed by the good news of Jesus, you should be joyful. All the time. Like, you should be like, oh, this is so great. I love this. But you hate your job. I don't love my job. I'm not a big fan of it. This is not me. Don't clip that out and show Ben later. That'd be bad. I love my job, Ben. But you should be like, but I have, like, what has God done for me? And that changes everything. It changes everything. Now, here's the deal. And I know this because I'm human and you're human and I get it. Don't get this confused. The list of behaviors that we just went through, whether it was for older men, older women, younger men, and bondservants or employees, these list of behaviors are not what you need to do so that you can be a good Christian. Like, this, doing the right thing, is not Christianity. Like, here's the deal. Many of us, and I know this, we grew up in this area, the Midwest, and you're talking work hard, blue collar type stuff, and you think that if you're good enough, then things will be fine. If you vote the right way, God's impressed. If you don't say the words that you know you shouldn't say, quote unquote, like, then God's good with you. If you show up to church on a regular basis, if you serve, if you give, God's impressed with you. If you're really kind at work, then God's going to be kind to you and he loves you. That is not Christianity. That's something totally different. In fact, Christianity, Jesus is different in the sense that we talked about this week 1. Your belief shapes your behavior, not the other way around. You cannot earn the love of God. You can't. Look at what he's, and listen, Paul knows this. Like, Paul knows that we're tempted toward this, like behavior modification, being good enough, so God's impressed with us. He knows, so that's why he says this next in verse 11. He says, for the grace of God has been revealed through Jesus, bringing salvation to all people, and we are instructed to turn from godless living and sinful pleasures. A better way, I think, to translate this would be, for the grace of God has been revealed, bringing salvation to all people, training us. What is training us? Grace. Like, grace is training us. If we're going to be a part of transforming, whether it's our home, workplace, church, school, business, whatever it might be, then we have to be prepared, or else we'll look just as foolish as if we show up to the DMV with the wrong paperwork. How are we prepared? By working real hard? How are we prepared? By being good enough? No, we're being prepared by grace. In fact, that's our bottom line for this week. Grace trains us to transform our world. It's grace that trains us to transform our world, to change our home, our marriage, our work, and the different areas that we show up. But we have to know what grace is too. What is grace? The way we're going to define it this weekend is grace is unearned kindness. It's unearned kindness. And this is the most powerful thought you could have, I think, in your day-to-day life, is to reflect on grace. This is how you're trained by grace, is if you spend time dwelling on it, reflecting on it, and thinking like, okay, when I read about Jesus, he's the most beautiful person that's ever lived. He's kind, he's patient, he's generous, he's loving, and he's so wicked brilliant. And this Jesus, knowing everything about me, and my temptation toward pride and arrogance and lust and all these things, this Jesus gives me kindness. And the more I reflect on that, the more in awe I am of this God, of this Jesus. Because I didn't earn it. There's no way. I know, if I'm honest with myself, I'm just being real with you guys. If it was up to Andy, if it was like, Andy, you could then be good enough and God could give you the kindness that you want and the love and acceptance that you want, I know I'd fall flat on my face every single time. Grace is unearned kindness. He says it, Paul says it in an earlier letter like this to the church in Ephesus. He says, God saved you by his grace when you believed. And you can't take credit for this. It is a gift from God. Salvation, being saved from the evil things, being saved from the things that you do that you can't stop doing and you want to stop doing, being saved from the constant need to perform and be good enough is not, key word here, not a reward for the good things we have done. You can't be good enough for God to accept you and love you. You just can't. So none of us can boast about it. There should be no Jesus follower walking around going like, I'm good enough, I figured it out, I got the key to success. It's not that way at all. The only one who could walk that way was Jesus, and he didn't. And so if we're going to transform our world, if we see things we want to fix, we want to be a part of the solution, whatever that solution might be to whatever problem you're thinking about, we have to let grace transform us. And grace trains us to transform our world. As we let grace seep deep into our roots and teach us about who we are and about who God says we are, it can change the way we show up. It can. Look at what Paul says next. He says, we should live in this evil world. And there's a lot of good in the world too. We don't talk about that enough. But there's also a lot of evil. We know this. It's obvious. It's everywhere. But we should live here with wisdom, righteousness, and devotion to God. Not complaining, not talking about all the problems all day, not going to work and be like, I hate my job, I don't like this, I wish this was different, complaining all the time, being super unjoyful joy suckers at work. It's not the way we were intended to live. And they had a really difficult circumstance back 2,000 years ago as well. They were dealing with persecution from many different angles. It's a brand new faith. Like we're building off of something, or we're living off of something they built thousands of years ago. So Paul doesn't say, hey, look at all the evil and be depressed. No, what does he say? We look forward with what? Hope to that wonderful day when the glory of our great God and Savior Jesus Christ will be revealed and he will right all the wrongs. And he wants to remind us again of how great Jesus is. This gospel message, verse 14, he gave his life to free us from every kind of sin. So what are you bringing in? What are you carrying? What's causing you weight? What's causing you guilt? What's causing you shame that you feel like if I could just clean this up myself, I'll be okay? If I could just stop doing this thing or start doing this thing, then God and I would be good, life would be better. If you've got that right now, Jesus wants to free you from that. My super self-righteous religious people, like I get it. God wants to free you from that. The people that would call themselves a sinner, like there's no way I'm getting into heaven, look what all I've done. Jesus wants to free you from that, to cleanse us and to make us, you, his very own people, his children. And when that happens, when you get grace, when he gives it to you and you understand it and you receive it and you go, the God of the universe is being kind to me, when you get that, what happens? You're totally committed to doing good deeds, not the other way around. And so again, if we're going to make a difference wherever, if we're going to transform, starting small, it might be our communities, it could be our city, it could be our state, it could be our country. If we could see things different, people treat each other kindly, we have to be trained for that. And how are we going to be trained for that? Grace trains us to transform our world. And what would happen if just in this church, if we started to allow grace to change us, to train us? If every time we started thinking, we showed up and we were not hypercritical at work and judgmental and going, I wish so-and-so would actually work harder because it makes my job difficult, and you're just constantly grumpy about everything. What would happen if it was different? What would happen if you showed up trained by grace? And you're like, man, if the God of the universe can give me kindness when I didn't deserve it, then who am I to withhold it from this person? What would happen? What would change? I think everything would change. At the bare minimum, your perspective would change and you would walk with joy, which is the way God intended you to. And so here in a second, after I pray, we're gonna be singing a song together, talking about what we've witnessed. It's called I've Witnessed It, and my invitation to you is wherever you are, whether you're in one of our churches here this morning, or you're watching online, or you're in a coffee shop. Might get a little weird in a coffee shop, but I want to encourage you to stand and to sing out loud and to reflect on the grace that God has given you and how you've witnessed it show up. And now, if you're going to be weird in a coffee shop, do it. You're a Christian. Christians are weird anyway. Just start singing, and people are like, hey, you got to calm down. You got a bad voice. Yeah, but Jesus wants me to sing, and I love this guy so much, I can't stop. Like, grace is so good. Grace teaches us, it trains us to transform our world. And so God, this morning, as we are going to sing together, I pray you would not let us forget how good you have been to us, how kind you have been to us. God, thank you for being kind to me. God, thank you for being kind to my